Lords, I rise to briefly offer support for Amendment 7, to which I actually thought I'd attach my name, but it was obviously an administrative fail on my part that I didn't, in the name of the noble Lady Baroness Jones of Whitchurch, and also Amendment 9, in the name of the noble Lady Baroness Young of Old Scone, both of which have strong cross-party support. It's a great pleasure to follow the noble Lord Krebs, and indeed the questions that he asked about how the government plans to define and measure biodiversity are questions that we canvassed extensively at committee. And I don't believe, I'd be very happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, that we have received any answer to that. And it really is essential for the understanding of this bill for those things to be defined and set out. Because as we discussed in committee, there are many different aspects of biodiversity, from the genetic within one population right through to the number of species and the range of species, and indeed the range of their habitats. I will briefly comment on Amendment 6, the government amendment, and as others have done, welcome it, in that one always has to welcome progress and acknowledge the huge amount of work done by campaigning NGOs and campaign groups to get us this far. But there's a term, shifting baseline syndrome, and the fact is, often if you look at the brilliant State of Nature report, which comes out regularly now from our NGOs, they often start from the 1970s. And, to quote some of these figures, we've seen more than 40% of species decline since the 1970s. But if you took the 50 years back from that, you're talking about a period of massive decline. If you go back further, we live in incredibly poor landscape. We've lost 133 species since the 1500s in the UK. Obvious, big, charismatic things like the lynx and the wolf, but also the apple bumblebee, the mittens beardless moss, the common tree frog, which failed to live up to its name. I was reading in preparation for this book, An Environmental History of Wildlife in England by Tom Williamson. Speaks about 17th century England teeming with wildlife. The polecat and the pine marten were present in every county. The great bustard was still a common sight on open land. That, my lords, is the kind of wildscapes we should be aiming, at least in part, to restore. And stopping decline goes absolutely nowhere to get us in that kind of destination. And I think that's where the Habitats Amendment 9 is really important. And I have been lucky enough once in France to visit something, and I'm going to apologise in advance for my French accent because I'm told I speak it with a very broad Australian accent. But in France, there's 234 sites called Reserve Biologique Intégrale, and they started in 1953. And they're quite small pockets of land where essentially just been left untouched. And I was lucky enough to visit one of these. And what struck me just amazingly on the trunks of the trees was just a depth of lichen that you could just touch and you felt like your hand sunk into it and it just went on forever. That's a depth of richness of wildlife that we are just so far from right now that we need to start to head back to. So, my lords, I very strongly commend Amendment 7 to the House and Amendment 9, but particularly Amendment 7, because this is where I'm afraid I'm going to disagree with the noble Lord Krebs, that I don't think halting decline is an ambitious target. It's holding us in an state of extreme poverty of nature. We have to do better.
This has been